You're watching the US election show with me, Gauri Dwivedi. Let's kickstart the show with headlines this evening. First up, Democrat presidential candidate Kamala Harris surges ahead of the Republican nominee Donald Trump in the latest polls coming in. Kamala Harris now leads Donald Trump 47% to 40% in the latest Reuters Ipsos poll. Kamala Harris and Trump are remaining neck and neck in the battleground states. US charges the gunman who tried to assassinate Donald Trump, Ryan Routh, faces maximum sentence of life in prison. US intelligence warns Donald Trump on Iran assassination threat. Donald Trump says that big threats on my life due to Iran. And President Joe Biden is set to visit Africa next month for the first time as president. Joe Biden is set to visit Angola to discuss economic partnerships. This is in keeping with the commitment he had made when he took over as the president of US. All right, the big story that we're tracking on US election show, Donald Trump has claimed that Iran has made quote-unquote real and specific threats to assassinate him in an effort to destabilize and sow chaos in the United States. The Trump campaign has released an official statement on its website saying that they fear that there is a real possibility of an assassination on the Republican candidate. There you can see that on your screens. That is the tweet that had been put out by Donald Trump and his campaign. So what does this mean? What does this mean in terms of the US elections? Does it mean that there is once again a very real possibility of more political violence that can take place? And before we get in the guests to talk more on this, let's quickly take a look at this report that tells you the background and what lies ahead as far as US elections 2024.
In the run-up to November's election in the United States, there have been 2 assassination attempts on former President Donald Trump. Shots were fired at Vice President Harris's campaign office in Arizona, and election officials are being targeted. Now, Trump's campaign has announced intelligence officials have briefed him on Iran's efforts to assassinate him. Trump has meanwhile now said that he believes Tehran will try again. Trump's campaign says that officials from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence informed them regarding real and specific threats from Iran to assassinate Trump in an effort to destabilize and sow chaos in the United States. While Google researchers released a report in August confirming that Iran-backed hackers targeted both the Trump and Biden campaigns in a phishing attack, just last week, investigators revealed that Iranian hackers sent emails to Biden's campaign associates using sensitive information stolen from Trump's campaign. Iranian officials have firmly denied any interference in US elections, but as of now, they have not provided any immediate comment on the matter. But Tehran says Washington, however, has interfered in its affairs for decades, citing events ranging from a 1953 coup against a prime minister to the 2020 killing of its military commander in a US drone strike. Meanwhile, the Republican presidential candidate also thanked Congress for unanimously approving a bill to enhance US Secret Service protections for major party presidential candidates. Parmeshwar Bava for NDTV World.
All right, let's quickly open this up to our guests this evening. The aspect that we are discussing as far as this election is concerned, can we expect more political violence in this year's election? And also the fact that those concerns regarding meddling in the American election, how much of it's real, how much of it's actually exaggerated, we'll discuss that. Ray Locker is a journalist with me on the broadcast. Also Irina joining us, she's a national security analyst from New York. We will get Omer as well in just a bit. Okay, your opening comments, both of you. Ray, let me start with you. This is an election like none other. You've had a candidate who's survived 2 assassination attempts. Threats are very real, and now he says and mentions Iran in that many words. So this is an unprecedented election, isn't it?
Oh, certainly it is, because it involves Donald Trump, which basically everything he does is unprecedented. And if he can find a new low, he will find it. I have no doubt that Iran wants to do something to Trump. After all, he was responsible for the killing of General Soleimani in 2020. They said they were going to seek revenge. So I think the threat is credible and real. But with Trump, he always hypes things involving him. So if it comes from him, you have to take it with a grain of salt. And if any of this is based on classified intelligence, the intelligence community is not going to reveal its sources. So we don't really know what is happening. But suffice to say, I think the threat is real. He's already had someone shoot at him once, another guy lurking in the bushes outside his country club, planning to do something. So yes, Trump is a very polarizing figure who is inviting people to do something about it.
Come in there. Donald Trump is a polarizing figure. He evokes sharp responses, reactions. Some say he's prone to exaggerating threats. But as things stand right now, here is a presidential nominee who's said and named Iran in that many words. So how do you view the threats that lie just about a month before an unprecedented election?
Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to add that just because Trump's style is polarizing, his comments and tactics are unacceptable or rude or even dangerous in some ways, does not excuse the meddling of foreign intelligence agencies, foreign assassins in US politics in any way, doesn't excuse any threat of violence, and does not give any justification to Iran to attack US officials or former officials, as they have repeatedly attempted to do. There were previous plots disrupted by the US intelligence. There were officials that were revealed to be part of these plots against Trump and other officials from his administration who could not be called unprofessional or in any way provocative. And I also think it's unacceptable to claim that someone who's a target of an assassination is inviting that sort of violence to himself. You can say that Trump's rhetoric.
No, nobody's hinting that. Nobody's hinting that. Let me qualify that and let me clarify it for our viewers. Nobody's for a second hinting that any of this is made up. Nobody's saying that. The question I had asked was that, do you think those threats, while being credible, could they possibly be being exaggerated? That's the word I used. But the fact that they are real, they are there, is for all of us to know, and which is why I said this is such an unprecedented election.
I think anything could in theory be exaggerated, but knowing the history of the Islamic Republic of Iran, they're very likely ongoing and continuous, because Iran has a history of plotting revenge against its targets, those who displeased it politically, for years, if not decades to come. And Donald Trump and his staff were not the only targets of such long-term and persistent efforts.
Let's get an Omer as well on this. I'm going to come to you, Irina. Just give me like 30 seconds. Omer, how do you read these threats that are coming in? Iran has been named, and the security threat that the US election faces to ensure that it conducts its election free and fair, and those allegations and fears and threats about meddling are taken care of and addressed.
Thank you very much for having me here. I would say that to say that Iran intention to carry a candidate inside the US is extremely overstated, exaggerated.
Okay, I'm going to try and address that line with Omer in just a bit. But Ray, respond to that while the threats are credible, real, and need to be addressed and dealt with, respond to what Omer is saying, which is that they could be more than what it actually is. Is that a fair assessment, or do you think that's just politics taking over a matter of great national security and also something that sets the record for America and its elections?
Well, the fact is, we don't really know what the threats are. I mean, if they come from classified sources, we don't know the details. Suffice to say, somebody has heard something, probably through NSA taps or whatever, that indicates it's a problem and it's something to be worried about. And if the Trump campaign is not taking it seriously, it should. It seems like they are taking it seriously, as should everyone. You know, an assassination of a political candidate in this country by a foreign actor would be devastating to the world order. And if Iran is definitely plotting on trying to kill Donald Trump and they succeed, and let's hope it never happens, then Iran is inviting a devastating response from the United States, regardless of who the president is. I mean, President Biden, Vice President Harris, anyone else who's in office in the United States would not stand for an attack on a U.S. political figure that's sponsored by Iran, and Iran
Absolutely.
would rue the consequences.
Absolutely. And as I said, hope that never ever happens and some of these threats are totally addressed and US conducts its elections in a free, fair manner, and the world awaits the results of the 5th of November election. Unprecedented as they are, and we're going to keep coming back and addressing some of these stories and these themes in coming days. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining me on this edition of US Election Watch. In fact, it's important that we play out this report where US has charged the Trump gunman with attempted assassination. His name is Ryan Roth. He's charged with attempted assassination of Donald Trump, the Republican candidate in this year's election, and he faces a maximum sentence of life in prison. Take a look at this report.
Take 2 steps to your right.
Ryan Ruth has been charged with the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump following a September 15 incident at Trump's Florida golf course. The indictment says that the alleged attempted assassination of Trump was a direct attack on the U.S. democracy. Charging him on 3 additional counts, the U.S. Department of Justice said that it will use every available tool to hold Ruth accountable. 58-year-old Ruth faces a maximum sentence of life in prison if convicted on the assassination charge. He already faces up to 20 years in prison of 2 gun-related charges. According to a court filing, Ruth wrote a note months earlier describing the assassination attempt and saying he intended to kill Trump. Although not as dramatic as the first assassination attempt 2 months ago, the September 15 incident had its share of twists and turns. As Trump was playing, a Secret Service agent spotted the barrel of a rifle sticking out of the bushes. The agent opened fire and Ruth fled. He was later captured. The probe alleges that Ruth arrived in Florida a month before the incident and spent time collecting information about the golf course and Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. Federal Judge Eileen Cannon, who was appointed to the bench during the Trump administration, will oversee the case, with her appointment done at random. With Vishal Vivek, Samya Afsar for NDTV World.
All right, shifting focus now to the latest in polls coming in as far as the election is concerned. An update coming in as far as the Reuters Ipsos poll is concerned. Kamala Harris now leads Donald Trump 47 to 40%. That's the latest numbers suggesting. And the latest CNN poll says, well, it's more neck and neck. It's 48 to 47%. So while the Reuters Ipsos poll seems to be headed towards one direction, CNN seems to suggest a different picture. And that's exactly what all pre-election polls are all about. They capture pulse of the voters to a certain extent. On your screens are also some numbers that tell on specific topics which are the candidate that is leading. On economy, Donald Trump seems to be leading Kamala Harris by a huge margin. Similar is the case for immigration. Remember, these are the 2 biggest issues on which US is going to vote. America is going to vote on the 5th of November. On immigration, 49 to 35%. And it's a similar story as far as economy is concerned. Now, neck and neck they are, however, in the battleground states, or the swing states. These are the states that have swung from Republican to Democrat or vice versa in the last 25 odd years. And in those states, battleground states, which pretty much are going to account for 2/3 of every electioneering that both campaigns are going to do and both camps are going to be focused on, they seem to be neck and neck and not really giving a clear picture of who could be leading in these elections, and also suggests that it may go down to the wire. Okay, let's open this up and let's get in our guest this evening. Anand Ahuja, who's attorney at law, Indian Americans for Trump, joins me on the broadcast. Good to have you, sir. David K. Johnston, he's a professor of public policy at the Rochester Institute of Technology. And we have Karthik Ramakrishnan, who's the founder and executive director of RP as well. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining in. Anand, let me start with you, sir. As things stand right now, well, if you look at the Reuters Ipsos poll, it seems to be suggesting that Kamala Harris has got and managed to get a bit of a lead, a significant lead over Donald Trump.
If you ask me honestly, the only poll that matters is the poll on the election day. So before that, there can be ups and downs. At times, Trump may be leading in certain polls. Kamala Harris may be leading one day on certain polls. But eventually, what matters is what election results state on the election day.
That's a motherhood statement, sir. That's a motherhood statement. Of course, only results matter. But these polls pretty much capture the mood of the voter, right? They capture the pulse of the people going into these elections, right?
So if you ask me on that particular point, then as you said very rightly, that there are two major issues. Number one is the economy and number two is the immigration. But I will add with that two more issues, and one of that is the foreign policy. This is for the first time in the United States that voters are basically taking some interest in the foreign policy of United States. Basically because of war, Ukraine-Russia war, what's happening in Israel, Gaza, Hamas, and now Iran. You just mentioned that how actively Iran is playing
That's an
a role
important point you're making. And let me ask
Pardon?
this to the other panelists, sir. Important point you're making, that this is an election, Mr. Johnston, respond to that. This is an election where Americans will also be very mindful of some of the geopolitical factors that may play on in these elections, and how much would that impact voter mindset and voter psyche?
Well, historically, Americans have not paid much attention to foreign matters. Only about 1 in 6 Americans even has a passport. But there's one other issue I think is very crucial in this election that you didn't mention, and that is a woman's right to control her body and her health care. I think that will be the deciding factor in this election. There have been a number of state and local votes on this issue. They have all gone the way that would indicate support for Kamala Harris. I'd also be very skeptical of polls because fewer than 1 in 100 people who are reached by telephone are answering the questions. So even though you can check the box that you have the right demographic mix of people, I think when your response rate is under 1 in 100 and in some polls 1 in 200, you can't rely a lot on these polls, and it helps explain why there are these big swings from one poll to the next.
Okay, and Karthik, let me then bring you in on this fact that tragic as it may be, most of the Americans vote on domestic issues. I would have used the word insular, but domestic issues is what I would stick to. But the fact is that this is an election like none other, you know, whether you talk about some of the global factors, the Iran aspect, the meddling issue that is being raised and again, and the national security concerns, given the fact that one of the candidates has had 2 assassination attempts. How much of that do you think is going to play in on voters' mindsets, and how much of that do you think is actually getting reflected in these polls that we are talking about?
Well, first, thank you for having me. And as someone who does surveys, I will both defend the methodology, but also acknowledge that any one survey has errors in them. And whenever possible, to aggregate across surveys and to find patterns That's what we should be doing, because there is a lot of noise that occurs. And as Professor Johnston said, there are issues there. What we have seen consistently too, by the way, I do surveys on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Even among Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, the only group that is majority immigrant, if you look at Asian Americans, foreign policy is very low as an issue. But can foreign policy play a role? Absolutely, but indirectly. So for example, if there's foreign interference in elections through misinformation and disinformation, usually we don't find out about this until months, if not years after, but now there's faster detection systems going on. That is one way that foreign policy can make a difference. One can also imagine that college campuses, depending on what happens in Israel, Gaza, if it's really egregious, that might be a source of tension that might hurt the Democratic Party. So there are ways that foreign policy could make a difference. It's at the margins, and the only way it makes a big difference is if it somehow directly affects issues like inflation or campus unrest.
Absolutely. Cost of living is what one hears again and again across the world as being a factor. And in fact, Professor Johnston, let me ask you this, that the two issues on which American voters are really expected to decide, which is immigration and economy, apart from abortion that you mentioned as well, both on immigration and economy, the numbers seem to totally be swinging in favor of the Republican candidate. Is that what the mood is on ground? I'm asking this because as of now, all we have are these polls and all we have are these numbers.
Well, again, those are the two issues that Donald Trump wants the election to be about. But I think that where we've seen this enormous response for Kamala Harris, she's gotten hundreds of thousands of people registered to vote. She's collecting about 3 times as much money each day from contributions as Donald Trump. The issue there, I think, is the U.S. Supreme Court decision, the first one to ever take away a right, and that was the right for a woman to have an abortion. And so there have been about 10 votes around the country related to this issue, and all of them have gone the direction that would tend to favor Kamala Harris.
Okay.
But the election is really about 7 states, the battleground states, not the whole country. We do not elect by popular vote in America. We elect the president through something called the Electoral College.
Right.
And this decision will be by 7 states.
Right. Very quickly, Mr. Ahuja, respond to that what Professor Johnston said, that the Republicans want this election to be only about 2 issues, but it's much more than that.
With due respect, I beg to differ with Professor Johnson. He is a learned person, but as far as the issue of abortion is concerned, there are 2 factors here. Number one, Supreme Court has not taken away a right of women. The only thing Supreme Court has said that it's not a federal matter, it's a matter that has to be decided by states. If you look into the 10th Amendment is very clear. It says that the powers not granted by people to state remain with people, and the powers not granted by states to the federal government remain with the states. So as per the 10th Amendment, this matter is to be decided by the states, not by the federal government. That's a decision of the Supreme Court. So Supreme Court has not taken away the rights. Supreme Court has sent it back to the states. Number 2, abortion is an issue in this election. Abortion is an issue, but it's not to that extent as economy, foreign relations, and basically, if you ask me, immigration. These 3 issues are. The reason for that is abortion basically has been made a big issue by Democrats and media, and that is limited to urban women. If you go to rural women, they are not that much bothered about the abortion as they are. In fact, they are more bothered about the grocery they are purchasing and running their household than the abortion in rural areas.
I'm afraid, gentlemen, I'm out of time. One would imagine that the leader of the free world would be chosen on issues other than, something as private as abortion, but that's what it comes down to. Karthik Ramakrishnan, I'm going to come back to you another day. I'm afraid I'm completely out of time, but on what Indian Americans are saying is a conversation we're going to come back to in about a couple of days, and I owe you that conversation in greater detail. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for taking out the time and speaking to me on US Election Watch. Let's quickly now address some of the other stories coming in from US right now, which is that Donald Trump has said and made a pitch that he wants foreign companies to set up more offices and more companies in America. One would say this is called onshoring, when businesses actually return onshore. This is to ensure that he gets more jobs at home. And this comes at the backdrop of rising concerns regarding recession hitting American economy. So in the backdrop of that, Donald Trump has promised more jobs by getting more companies to come on board and onshoring. All right, shifting focus now to more news coming in. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that he is on his crucial trip. He said that he has met U.S. senators. He's also scheduled to meet Joe Biden as well as Kamala Harris. And Zelensky is set to present a victory plan to both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Remember, there's been a bunch of meetings that Zelensky has been having in the last couple of months, and both candidates, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, have been asked their game plan to ensure they end the war in Russia, Ukraine. All right, with that, it's a wrap on this edition of US Election Watch. Thanks so much for watching.